In Britain, head teachers have been given the legal right to ban their students from wearing burkas. Of course, ultra-libs see this as anti-Islamic or even racist. Just a reminder, Islam is not a race, and there's nothing wrong with opposing an intolerant, oppressive theology that oppresses and murders those who do not share it. In France, there's already a nationwide ban on wearing burkas in schools. But UK Education Secretary Nicky Morgan says that this is not that sort of action, and that it is very much up to schools to decide if they want to ban burkas or not. This is the kind of craven cowardice that we have come to expect from a British government more concerned with offending a dangerous minority than serving the interests and the values of the British public. I'd like to say that this was just the action of the Conservative Party at the political right, but the fact is British politicians have been appeasing immigrants and Muslims for decades. This is a cancer that transcends the political divide. Just last week I made a video saying that we need to deal with Muslims by showing them love and compassion, and I stand by that. But it should not be the stupid, turn the other cheek, suicidal kind of love that Jesus preached. I won't be embracing them as they stab us in our backs. The fact is, living in Britain means something. It means that you are part of a mostly democratic process in which the voice and values of the citizens are heard and represented in our laws and our way of life. It means that men and women have equal status and children have rights. It means that blatant racism and sexism are frowned upon, and inappropriate sexual behaviour towards children is absolutely not tolerated. When a foreigner comes to live in Britain, either by design or because they are fleeing persecution in their own nation, it means that they accept the values that make our society appealing to them. If they find those values antithetical to their own, then they should go to a country that is more in line with the way that they want to live. It is totally unacceptable for people to migrate to Britain, then try to impose their values upon us. For some reason, decades of British governments have turned into collaborators and appeasers, every bit as treacherous as the French collaborators of World War II. Hyperbole, you say? According to the Rotherham report, thousands of British schoolgirls are being traded around as sex toys by Muslim immigrants, who repeatedly rape both British and immigrant children. Worse still, the authorities conspired to hide this fact from the British public. Furthermore, thousands of young girls are still being sexually mutilated to comply with barbaric Islamic customs. British schoolboys are murdered and the crimes are downplayed in the press and by the government. And still the doors are wide open to those who will fundamentally change British society for the worse. This is not the glorious melting pot of races and cultures that idealists such as myself dreamed about in the 70s and 80s. This is the enforced corruption of an advanced culture with the barbaric values of cultures who take their ideas of morality and human rights from a pre-Dark Ages desert warrior culture. For a long time, I have pondered over why the shocking statistics on crime by Muslim immigrants is being constantly underplayed by the mainstream media from all parts of the spectrum, left, right, tabloid, broadsheet, television news and online. Even social media, it seems, in the face of Facebook and Twitter, has conspired to ensure that the majority of Britons are kept in the dark about the extent of the problem. Conspiracy theorists mutter about Jewish-owned media and a new world order masterminded by an ultra-wealthy elite who sees the rest of us simply as drones in service of their machinations. I've always dismissed such wild-eyed Alex Jones ravings in favour of an alternate theory, that the British government was afraid to allow the extent of Islamic treachery to the British people be known, in case the British people decided that they were not willing to tolerate these vipers among us, and started to indiscriminately attack all Muslims, or worse still, all dark-skinned foreigners. But if that was the government's motivation, surely they would not continue to import more and more Muslims into our country. Once the danger is identified, only a madman would deliberately worsen the problem. Following 9/11, we had our own terrorist attacks, the worst of which was the bus explosion on 7/7, and there have been numerous unsuccessful attempts at further attacks. And throughout it all, scum like Abu Hamza and Anjem Choudary were permitted to walk free and preach hate against the very nation that had welcomed them and their families with open arms, protected by the very freedoms that they would be denied in most Muslim nations on earth. Worse still, their rhetoric was used to recruit soldiers for Islamic extremism, who would strike back at the very nation that shelters them. Talk about nursing a viper to your breast. But in spite of that, we must remind ourselves time and time and time again that this is not the face of mainstream Islam in Britain. That the majority are peaceful, if insular, and live by whatever positive virtues they can discern from the Quran. True, according to a BBC radio poll, a sickening 45% of them think that teaching violence against the West is part of mainstream Islam, but that doesn't mean that they would actively participate. Regardless of their beliefs, they are still nothing but guests in Britain. Second or third generation guests in some cases, but guests nevertheless. It is not beholden upon Britain to change to accommodate them. We did not ask them to come visit, they chose to come. And we have been more than accommodating in making them feel welcome, even as the cancer of Islam creeps across the nation, gaining converts and breeding into large enough numbers to affect our political landscape. We allow them to build schools, mosques, and even to overlay their own Sharia law on top of British law, whilst clowns like Chowdhury go out onto British streets with his Muslim thugs and try to impose their standards of sobriety and modesty on British women. So when I hear Muslims demanding to import their barbaric clothing customs into non-Muslim British schools, I say no, absolutely not. Not simply for the sake of opposing all things Muslim, but because a burqa is antithetical to the values we hold as important. A hijab is a traditional Middle Eastern item of clothing that wraps the hair in a kind of headscarf. It is associated with concepts of modesty, but is not nearly as restrictive as a burqa, which leaves only the eyes uncovered. It can be beautiful, fashionable, even sensuous. But a burqa is not worn for fashion. A burqa is not worn because it's a convenient or functional item of clothing. A burqa is worn because it is culturally mandated within the theology of Islam. It is worn because the highly patriarchal values of ancient Islam deem that seeing any part of a woman is so sexually inflammatory that weak males would not be able to control their lust. This is as insulting to males as it is oppressive to females. Having seen the way the Muslim males behaved on New Year's Eve in Cologne, Germany, sexually assaulting hundreds of women, it is clear that women have very real reasons to be fearful of the values of Muslim men, if these immigrants are anything to go by. Britain is one of the most prudish and sexually uptight of all European nations, but even we are a million miles away from the values that force women to wrap themselves head to toe in a linen sack. What message does this send about the value of women in the self-control of men? Is this a value that we are willing to see promoted in British schools? Most schools have rightly become sensitive to the damaging effect of bullying amongst its students, yet this cultural and gender bullying should be optionally permitted according to cowardly Nicky Morgan. There's a reason why social services in Britain will intervene in families who are deemed to be raising their children poorly. Sacrosanct though we hold the rights of parents to raise their kids according to their own personal values, there are some baselines below which society considers no parent has the right to go. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, malnourishment and more. If you raise your child as a Nazi, you will most certainly have your children taken from you. But if you force your daughter to live her life in a cloth bag, then that's just a cultural choice. Some people have argued about the risk of kids using the burqa to hide terrorism. I think that's an extremely low danger. The first day that a Muslim girl arrives in a burqa is the first day as a head teacher that I institute full-body metal detector scans for burqa-wearing students. Biased against Muslims? Sure. And when over 40% of Muslims don't believe that violence is a part of their mainstream religion, that bias can stop. In the classroom they will receive the same respect, the same quality of education and the same opportunities. But as long as they belong to a theology that sees non-believers as prey, then they will be treated with caution. In the meantime, anyone who proves that they subscribe to 6th century values merely by the way that they dress is going to be subject to a tiny bit more scrutiny. But I haven't even covered the most important reason why the burqa has no place in British schools. According to Professor Albert Mehrabian, only 7% of communication is verbal. The rest comprises of tone, facial expression, gestures and body language. That means that in a literal sense, students who interact with burqa-wearing girls are denied the vast majority of cues that enable them to read the intent of these girls. Can you imagine how frustrating it would be to try to have a conversation with someone where you only get to hear one word in every 14? How long would you voluntarily persist in conversing with that person? That's bad enough for the non-Muslim students, but it's a million times worse for the Muslim girls. A burqa is specifically designed to be isolating, not just from the eyes of men but from society in general. If you locked your kids away in an attic, you'd lose them the second social services discovered. But the burqa is a mobile prison, and one which is barely any less socially harmful. It is abuse, pure and simple, and the fact that in many nations it has its supporters amongst Muslim women is no reason to allow its use in British schools. The fact that someone has been indoctrinated since birth hardly prepares them well to make an impartial choice about the thing about which they have been indoctrinated. As the Jewish saying goes, "Give me the boy until 7 and I'll give you the man." I do not even remotely ask that other cultures surrender their identity in order to coexist and live in Britain, although it seems unreasonable to come here but remain culturally isolated. For the cultural melting pot to occur, foreign cultures need to mix, not remain as isolated pockets of wherever they came from. Britain does not benefit from the presence of such enclaves. They become like parasites, taking what they want from Britain and giving nothing back. Cultural diversity was one of the things that I naively looked forwards to when we became part of Europe. Enjoying the cultural richness of our neighbours in France, the Mediterranean and other nations, and broadening my cultural horizons seemed like a great ideal. As the mongrel product of half a dozen different nations myself, I was eager for a Britain full of beige-coloured people. Little did I know that this diversity would be imposed under force of law and threat of imprisonment, no matter how retrograde the cultures and their customs happen to be. Some values are so fundamental that they should not be up for debate in British society. In Turkey recently, they voted against banning child marriage, yet in Britain we would be disgusted at the thought. Likewise, the abuse and primitive thinking of making young women bag themselves is something that has no place in a British classroom. This is simply too much of a charged issue for Nicky Morgan to abdicate responsibility for leadership and dump the choice into the laps of head teachers who already face enough hostility from parents as it is. The average head teacher has enough on their hands trying to pass the next Ofsted report and trying to deliver a decent quality education on budget without also tackling moral and social quandaries of this magnitude. This is an occasion for Nicky to pull on her big girl pants and justify her salary and the faith that the British public has placed in her and lead from the front rather than shouting suggestions from behind the settee. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please take the time to rate and comment, and it would mean a lot to me if you would subscribe. Thank you.